As a cookie decorator, do you know what my most popular or requested set was? It was always for baby showers. And I love doing these cookies because they're really simple and you can use the shapes over and over again. And the ideas and the designs are endless because there's so many themes. And this is one that I've done recently that I want to walk you through step by step. So most of you know, if you've watched my tutorials, I use 2 consistencies. So what that means is I have 2 bags of icing, one for thicker icing, which I call my outline icing, and one for thinner icing, which is my flood icing. My outline icing I use to do the outlines for all my shapes and my cookies, and that holds the flood icing in. Basically, one has less water, the thicker icing, and one has a little bit more water added to it. That's my flood. And what that does is that gives you that nice even look that those royal icing cookies have, that everything is nice and smooth and kind of flat. Versus, let's say, a buttercream or a fondant, where they're different textures and they don't give you quite the same final product. So I've outlined the bottom of my bottle here. I usually let my outline dry for 1 or 2 minutes and then I'll go ahead and flood. If you're doing a whole set and you have, 5, 6, 7 of these bottles to decorate, I would go through and outline all of the bottles, and then come back and start flooding them. And by the time you've outlined everything, it would be dry enough so when you go and flood, your outline is nice and dry and ready to go. The reason I like to let my outline dry is that it keeps its shape better. And so sometimes when you're flooding and your outline isn't dry or somewhat dry, it kind of pushes the outline out further. So it really depends on the design that I'm doing. If I'm outlining the edge of the cookie, I like it to hold its shape because I don't really want the icing to fall off the cookie or the kind of shape to change. However, if I'm doing smaller details or like circles, free-handed, then I might flood right away so then I can move my outline around if I need to. You'll see me, I'll do a little squiggle there in the pink part of the bottle. And this is to help support the icing. I do a lot of this because any small or narrow areas can crater or end up with an indent. So the icing kind of dries on the edges quicker than it does in the middle, and then the middle ends up sinking down. So this gives it a little bit of a support. And now I'm going to do the top of the bottle here. And again, I'm using my outline consistency to do that squiggle. And that just helps support the icing so it doesn't crater. If you have really small areas, sometimes it dries with the hole because it sinks so much that you'll get a little hole in it, or you get like an indent in like larger areas like this that are still kind of small. So when in doubt, do a squiggle. It helps a lot. And if you can dry in front of a fan to get the air circulated, that helps dry your icing and crust it over. And once it's crusted, it doesn't tend to crater as much. So now that I've let all the layers dry here, you can see it's a little bit more matte looking, not as wet and shiny. I'm going to go do some details on the pink part here. And I'm taking my outline consistency and just drawing little lines. So I'm touching my icing down, lifting the bag up very slightly. I'm not drawing the line directly onto the icing. I've just lifted it up enough, and that gives me a smooth line. When we lift up our piping bag, it lays the line a little bit more straight than if I was like dragging the bag along the icing. When I get to the end, I just touch down and secure the line again, and that breaks it off. The reason I'm staying so close to the cookie, not lifting it up really high, is these are smaller lines, they're short. So if I lift it up too high, then when I come back down, I'll be way over the pink part. And you can see my pink base is dry, so the lines stay on top of the icing. If it was wet still, it would kind of sink into the icing. And same thing now, I'm adding some details on the bottle part. And again, just with my outline consistency because I want those lines to stay where I'm piping them. And there you have it, a nice simple bottle. A bottle is always a great cookie to have in one of these sets because it's so simple to make and it's a great filler set. And everybody loves to have this shaped cookie in their baby shower set. Now here's a fun cookie shape that I also like, and I just got recently actually because I've seen it around a lot, and I will link it in my description of the video. This is the 3 balloons, and I love how versatile it is for birthdays, for Valentine's Day, even for Christmas if you want, for baby shower sets, wedding, whatever you'd like. There's so many variations of this shape that I've seen, and I absolutely love all of them. And so it's such a great shape to have. So These are the type of things I look for when I'm buying cookie cutters is, can I get multiple uses out of them? Can I get, different themes or different seasons or holidays? So I like to do that. So I'm getting more use of just like doing one design per cookie. I do have some cutters like that as well, but ones that I could use often or that I really love. So you can see that I've outlined the cookie, I've let it dry for a few minutes, and then I've gone ahead and flooded it. Now, always be careful when you're flooding kind of more narrow areas or areas that kind of go inwards, because the flood wants to spread out. So you just don't want to overfill those areas. If your outline is too thin, it may run over the edge. And as you fill the cookie more and more, it's pushing it more outward. So just be careful you don't overfill your cookie in those narrow sections. Then I'm going to go ahead and let this dry. It takes about, let's say, 45 minutes, maybe an hour if you live in a humid area, for it to crust over enough to do the next layer. If you have a fan or a dehydrator on a very low heat, you can use that as well to speed up the drying process. It takes about 20-30 minutes for me when I use my dehydrator. And then I can go ahead and do these lines on top. So I'm using my brown outline consistency for those lines. And again, the same premise. I'm touching down my bag. I squeeze a little bit of icing, secure it to the cookie, lift my bag up to get a nice straight line, and then touch it back down. Now here's an example of when I don't let my icing outline dry. Because I'm doing circles here for the balloons, and circles are probably the hardest shaped to freehand. So I'm going to do my outline. I've done my little squiggle here. And right away, I'm going to go in and flood my cookie. And the reason I'm doing it right away is because I know my circle isn't very perfect. So not letting my outline dry gives me the ability to move it around and spread it out a bit. So now I can make it more of a circle shape, a little bit more perfect than it was, because my piping isn't that great free-handed. And so now it really, really gives me so much flexibility to move it. So I was able to kind of fix that one side that didn't come out right. And I find it so much easier to do that with circles or certain shape. It's so much easier to do that with circles or other kind of strange shapes, or, that you can't quite pipe perfectly. And you kind of move it around with the scribe, and it gives you a much more kind of sense of how even it is, and you can fix it a lot easier. Another thing with craters, so not only do you do little squiggles to help prevent them, but also this white base layer that I've done, we don't want to wait for this to fully dry when I'm doing these details of the balloons. I want to wait for it to be crusted over and still like kind of wet inside. So right now, if I push my scribe through, or if I pushed hard enough with my finger through the white icing, it would crack and it would kind of still be wet underneath. So the top layer is sort of dry. I can touch it a little bit with my finger gently and it won't push through. But it's not fully dry, and this helps also prevent craters. So I tried to do as many of those things that I can. Does it always work out the way that I have enough time to do all my details on the second layer before, it dries too much? No, there's days that like I would just do the base and the next day I would do the details. But if you can, or you might be doing small details, you really don't want them to crater, these are kind of the things I think of when I'm planning my set and how many days I need to do it and how many hours I'm going to spend on it each day. So those are kind of things that I keep in mind for the more kind of, I would say, sensitive cookies, the ones that give me more trouble or may give me more trouble. And then here on the middle balloon, I'm going to add some ears. This is going to be our teddy bear balloon. So when I was talking about versatility and using these cutters, this is one way of making it different. I've seen people do it for sports and do kind of sports themes like basketball, soccer, and football. I've seen just plain balloons, and then I've seen other shapes like watermelons or fruits, things like that. So we're doing a baby set here, and it's teddy bear themed, so we are going to do a teddy bear face here. And I like to use my outline for the ears. If you put enough icing there, you can smooth it out very quickly. And then just adding a little detail to the bottom of the balloon there. And then we're going to do his snout, I guess you could say. Is that what you say, snout? Then we're going to just do his mouth area here. So I'm going to do the white, and then it's my outline consistency. And because it's a smaller area, I just put quite a lot of icing there. And it's a nice bubble of icing that I can smooth out super easy. So for those kind of small things, it's really hard to do outline and flood. So I just want to make sure that I use my outline and it's nice and puffy. And then I'm going to let that dry. Now that my teddy bear's face is fully dry, this actually dried overnight because to do these details with a marker, you want it to be really dry, especially with the fine marker. It pokes through the icing very easily. So if it's only crusted over, sometimes it will poke right through. And I like to do these little details with marker because it kind of saves you a little bit of time when you're doing lots of them, and the details are nice and crisp. And there we have our balloon cookie. Our next cookie as well, I will link below. This is another cutter that I've recently got for this set because I've always wanted it, and this really gave me a reason to go and get it. I thought it was super cute and, again, versatile to use. You can kind of turn it into different things, but very popular baby cutter. And it's basically a kind of clothesline with some baby items on it. So when I'm outlining kind of bubbly, circular cookies like this, I will always over exaggerate my outline, especially for those inward kind of sharp corners. So you can see some of the parts there that, not the outward parts, but when I'm going back into the cookie, I'm over pronouncing those edges and making sure that I'm coming all the way up into it. And the reason being, because again, when you're flooding your cookie, your flood wants to spread out. And so sometimes when you have like a point inward to your cookie, the icing really wants to spread over that area, and I really want to keep that shape. I like those sharp corners and those round kind of edges. So I'm trying to keep those as much as possible. So if I overline that area, then it really keeps the icing in. And you can see that I'm going kind of around those inward corners. I'm not really flooding over them too much. I don't want the icing to go over those corners. And this is kind of how you keep the shape. If you find your flood is going over your outline too much, you could cut your bag a little bit bigger and make your outline a little bit thicker. Or you can make your flood a little bit thicker as well. There's kind of little tricks you have to sometimes adjust, and practice makes perfect, like they always say, because the more you do this, the more you'll know what works best for you. What works best for me might not be what works for everybody. Now we're going to take our brown outline consistency, and we're going to draw a line across by touching down, lifting the bag up nice and high, and then taking it across the cookie, and that will give me a nice straight curved line, if that makes sense. And then we're going to go ahead and draw the bows at the end here. And so I'm just taking my time, and anytime there's kind of a curve or a line, I'll lift up my bag so the icing falls. On this side, you kind of see a little bit more how I'm guiding my icing and I'm letting it fall and kind of keeping full control of it. So I kind of push down to get the icing to secure itself to the cookie. So when I have the icing kind of high and I know I have control, I push down when I'm doing circles to kind of let it flow around versus me dragging it. Because when you're dragging it, you almost have to over pronounce that circle. So if I push the icing out with a little bit more force, it kind of pushes it out and it gives me a little bit more room to maneuver it around in the right spot versus me kind of dragging it and it not connecting where I want to go. So the first one we're going to hang up on here is the little diaper. So I've outlined the diaper shape and then I've just put in my outline consistency for the craters. And then the middle one, I'm going to go ahead and do a onesie. And so while my outline dries for the diaper, I'm going to outline the onesie. And the reason I want to let it dry for a bit is I really want it to keep its shape. But this is a very kind of small design, so I don't want to, go ahead and flood it right away and then by accidentally move the outline around. You can always do these as royal icing transfers as well. So what you can do is print out on a piece of paper the shapes that you want to do. So if you want to do like a onesie, a diaper, and then whatever else, you can print those on. You can grab a piece of either parchment paper, or a lot of people like to use those plastic kind of page protectors. So you would put your paper in there and then you would basically just trace and flood and decorate on top of the page protector. And you would just trace the outline of the onesie and then fill it in like you would, just like you were doing on a cookie. And then you let it completely dry and they just pop off the plastic. And then you can basically glue them on this cookie with royal icing. So if you're doing a set or you had a lot of these, let's say it was a huge baby shower, you can do these in advance. It's almost like those sprinkles or those eyeballs or like those little sugar things you find at Michael's for cupcakes and cookies. These are the same idea. You could do that. And then you can do them ahead of time, let them dry, store them in a container. And then when you have your cookie ready and flooded, you can attach them to the cookie. I'm only doing a few for this set, so I didn't need to do that. But it's always an option to do that way as well. And if you have a hard time freehanding a lot of things and you don't have a projector, it's also a good way to do these kind of little things with some detail and make them more even and nice. You see, especially with the onesie too, I like to let the outline dry there and then flood it, and it holds its shape really, really well. And then the last one, we're going to do the bib. And again, always have my little squiggle in there, and then I go ahead and flood it. And again, I waited for that outline to dry just to make sure that it holds the shape really nice. And then we're just going to add a little detail here, just like little pegs holding up the clothes here. So we're just doing tiny lines, and because these are so tiny, I'm really just keeping it right above the cookie, almost dragging that line because it's so small. Very, very minimal pressure, very little pressure, because we don't need a lot of icing to come out. And now that the flooded parts have dried, I can go ahead and do some of the details. So just keeping it simple and just adding some details with my outline consistency. This is a big reason I like having two consistencies, is because I need my outline for details anyways. So I might as well make two consistencies from the get-go. A lot of times when people use one consistency, they either have to make some more detail icing later, or the details aren't quite as sharp. So I like to have both of those consistencies on hand, because I can make my flood looser, and that kind of makes the cookies smooth out faster. I don't have to go in each one with a scribe or shake the cookie. I can just flood and move on, and it'll settle itself, and it kind of saves me a lot of time. And then you can make these cute little details. So I added a little teddy bear for the onesie and a little heart on the bib as well, just to give it something. And then just gonna add some kind of like pins to the diaper here, just to give it a little bit of color. And there you have our clothesline cookie. Next up, we have the baby rattle, another very popular cookie for this set that I've used countless of times and done a lot of different varieties of this. This one I decided to pipe the whole base layer of the cookie. Sometimes I'll just do the rattle right on top of the cookie and not kind of cover the whole base. And sometimes I leave a little bit of bare cookie, which I don't mind. Some people don't like it in their sets. I don't mind here and there having some bare spots, especially if like the shape isn't quite what I want it. But for this one, I wanted to kind of cover it all and have icing on the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is just color the base all white. So again, I've just done what I always do, outline my cookie here, flooding in the middle. A lot of people don't like to see that outline. So if you're one of those people, that's okay. If you can flood if you want while the outline is still wet, that's okay. It kind of melts together a little bit better. I don't mind the look of it. You can't really see them on my cookies when you're looking at them unless you're kind of looking from the side. But I do tend to flood on top of the outline a bit just to hide it. Not over it, but just kind of slightly on top just to cover it enough and not necessarily beside my outline. So that covers it enough for me from where you're looking at the cookie and you don't really notice that outline at all. And here, same idea. I'm doing a circle for the top of the rattle. And then I put my squiggles in. This was all with outline consistency. And then right away, I'm going to go in with my flood and flood on top. And the reason, again, why I'm going right away is, although it's not a bad circle, it needs a little bit of fixing up. So here I can really just pull my icing with my scribe. And I can just make it a little bit more perfect. So if one side's end up if one side ends up a little bit sloppy or it doesn't quite look full circle, then this helps. Scribe is such an underrated tool. If you don't have a scribe, you can use like a toothpick or like a shish kebab, long stick, toothpick, whatever you want to call it. But it just helps so much with moving the icing around, smoothing it out. When I have really tiny corners or details, it just helps so much to get those on. If I have really tiny areas with icing, I use my scribe to help me out, get the icing in there. So there's a lot of benefits. It's a super cheap tool, and it's great to have these like metal ones that are sharp, because if you have any bubbles or anything, you can pop them, and you can really just move your icing around where you need it to go. Super, super helpful. And here I'm drawing the middle of the rattle here, and here I'm drawing the middle of the rattle. And you notice I just put a line down the middle. I can't really do a squiggle because it's such a small area. So what I'm just going to do is just put a line in there. And again, this is a super narrow space. And what would happen is it would basically indent the whole way down if I didn't do that squiggle. If I just flooded it and left it. Because the outline basically kind of keeps the flood up. And then it just sinks in the middle. So it dries like that. And the worst part about craters is everything looks great when you first flood it, and then you put it away to dry, and hours later you think all is going to be good, and you look at it and there's craters everywhere, or in such big spots. So it's happened several times, especially when I was a beginner and I didn't quite know, and it was just devastating. Sometimes you put so much work into it, and then you want it to be perfect, and it looked perfect, and then all of a sudden this happened. So this is why you see me squiggle everything. I'd rather do it. It takes a second extra, and it saves me a lot of heartache after. So now I've just done some triangle shapes here. This is going to be our bow. And again, I've just loosely done it with my outline and then filled it with flood right away, and I'm just moving it around to fix it. You want to make sure your pink and brown layers are dry enough, crusted over, so that it's sat a little bit, just enough so that we don't want this melting into each other. So if I didn't wait for the pink to dry or the brown, the yellow would just kind of melt in and push them around, and it wouldn't be kind of on top of those areas. And again, I'm just going to do the bottom parts of the bow here. These are really narrow, so again, I've just kind of done a little line where I could with my outline just to support the icing. And here I'm just using my scribe to bring the icing to the very, very corners of the tips, and to bring it up to the part of the bow, the top part of the bow. And that's another thing with the scribe, is those really narrow areas. I'm putting just a little bit of icing, like almost not even pushing my bag, because it's just kind of flowing out of my bag. But it's really hard to get into those really narrow areas with the hole size that I have. And I don't want to cut a tiny hole because I might have to flood a bigger section later or before. And so just using my scribe to push the icing where it needs to be. And then we're just going to add a little bit of detail here on the top of the bow. So again, this yellow bow, the base has dried. And now we're going in to do the details. And so I'm going to add those details on the side. So just outlining the top of the bow and then adding the middle as well. Just a nice big bubble. And we have our baby rattle. Okay, now we have our teddy bear cookie, and I love this cookie. It turns out so cute, but the shape is a little bit odd, and I can never figure out how to do a teddy bear exactly the way this cookie is kind of shaped. This is from the Wilton 101 cookie cutters, and it came in a box set with kind of the most common cookie cutters and then a bunch of holidays in there like Christmas and Easter and Halloween. So it's one of the first cookie cutters I think I had got, and I thought it was great because it was a really good deal for 101 cutters. It has a bunch of basic shapes as well, which is really nice. So kind of to get around this shape where I don't really know how to kind of make him cute is I'm going to flood a little bit of icing on the edges, and I'm just going to use a brush to spread the icing out. Now, I could have done what I did with the rattle, and I could have flooded a base layer and completely covered the cookie, but because most of this cookie is going to be covered with the bear, I didn't want a huge layer of icing and then another layer of icing as well to have a really thick layers, to have a really thick kind of icing on top. So I'm just doing this for that reason. So I'm not having kind of layer upon layer of icing, but also it's a good shortcut way too. Like if you're kind of in a rush or you have a lot of things to do, or you don't want to spend time flooding and drying and then going back. So this kind of is like a shortcut way of doing it, and you still get a little bit of icing on it, and most of the cookie will be covered in icing, so it's really not that bad. I really wanted this bear to be really cute, so I did write on it with edible marker just to make sure that I get the proportions right, because I'm not the best at freehanding sometimes, so this just helps me gauge exactly how I should be piping. So I used some edible marker. You can find that in my Amazon store, linked below in the description. I appreciate all the support that everyone goes, and if you buy things from my Amazon store, I make a small commission off of it, and it does not cost you anything extra. So I really appreciate the support, and it helps me fund the channel and all the equipment that goes into filming and editing. So I really appreciate and thank you all for the support that you've given me over the years. So we're going to do this kind of strategically, where we've started with the stomach, and then we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to go and do the other parts kind of on the outside. So my goal is not to do every section that's touching each other. I want to do kind of every other section so that it doesn't melt together. I want to keep those sections separate. So the way we do that is by letting the icing dry, instead of kind of piping the belly, then the head, then the arms right one after another, and then all the icing will just melt together. So I've gone ahead and outlined the head, and then I'm going to do the feet. And because I'm doing that at opposite ends, I can do them at the same time and kind of save myself some time. Versus if I started with the head, let that dry, then I got to go back and do the belly, let that dry, then I'd have to go back and do the feet and let that dry. So this is kind of doing two things at once and saving a little bit of time. Now, is this head big enough not to crater? Probably. But again, to be on the safe side, I like to put my squiggles, because sometimes I get those little like kind of indents or like a long line indent in my icing. And I want him to be nice and puffy and kind of nice and bulgy, or it's a stuffed animal. You want him nice and round. So I don't want any craters or indents or anything like that. So that's why I'm putting those squiggles there. And again, you never know when they'll happen, in what kind of, is it small enough, big enough? So it's super easy, kind of fun to do little squiggles here and there too. It's kind of good practice with your piping bag for pressure piping. So take advantage, do it, and have some fun with it. And you can see that my head or my legs, when I'm flooding them, they're not melting into the body that I've already piped and let dry. So I'm going to smooth out those lines a bit, but you'll see a nice separation between the body and the legs and the head. And that's exactly what I was going for, and why I let that section dry a little bit before I went in and did the rest. Usually when I'm doing these types of sectioning, I'll make sure kind of to plan it in my head. What do I need to do first? And then second, to make sure I'm kind of using as least time waiting for sections to dry. Sometimes it works out really well. Sometimes you just can't avoid it and all the sections are touching one way or another. You can see now I've moved on to the ears and the arms, and they're not touching each other. Everything else has dried. So we're kind of in a good position. So we've done it kind of in 3 steps. And those arms, because they're kind of narrow, I'm putting very little icing. I don't want to flood too much over the stomach area. So I'm just putting very little bit. And if I can't quite get into the corners there, that's okay. I'll use my scribe to make sure I get in there. As long as I have enough icing to pull with my scribe, all is good, and I can fix with my scribe. So this is an excellent example, again, of how such a simple, cheap tool, probably one of my best, especially in the beginning when you're smoothing out your icing, you can't quite get your flood consistency right. If you need to scrape off your outline because it didn't fall where you needed to, all those things you can do with the scribe. So it's a great tool to have. Now we're going to go ahead and do the ears, of course. And these definitely need some squiggles in them because I know they will crater or get holes in them because these are nice round little sections. So we want to make sure that we get no holes or craters. And then while the icing is still wet, I'm going to add some of my white icing in the middle here. That's my white flood, and I'm just putting that in just so it melts right into the brown. So this is the difference between waiting for something to dry and doing it kind of wet on wet, what we call, where you just pipe one thing on top of another while it's still wet and it just melts inside of it and then it becomes one flat layer. Now the mouth or the kind of snout area, I'm doing that on a dry section so you can see how it's standing on top of the icing, and I want that look, that 3D look. So that's why I waited for it to dry and then did that with my outline consistency and then smoothed it out. So that's kind of the difference between waiting for sections to dry and not when you're piping on top. And then I'm going to go with my pink outline consistency and add a bow here to the neck. And then again with my edible marker, sometimes with the eyes and kind of small details, I like to do these fine details with edible marker. It just looks a little bit more sharp than doing like with the mouth. Doing that with a very tiny icing line is very hard, and it kind of sometimes looks a little bit too thick and it doesn't look right. So these markers are great. If you can find a fine tip pen, it's great. This is a dual tip one. It's hard to find lately, but it has a thicker pen on one side, marker on one side, and then has this finer line on the other side. So it's really great for these little details. And then I'm just going to add some eyelashes as well, and that completes our bear cookie. Now this next cookie is another one that I've probably used in every single baby set I've done, and it is the word baby. I just love adding words to sets. They're just not, I don't know what it is, but the bubbly letters, the cursive letters, they just look so beautiful. And even though it specifically says baby, I've used it in all my sets, and I've seen this done so many different ways where people have airbrushed the background or, done the same color letter and the same color base or different colors. Like there's so many added flowers, added designs, added details with edible marker. There's so many different ways you can do it. And there's just something about those letters and just the way, it just adds to the set. This is quite a large cutter as well. And when I'm doing words, I kind of prefer them a little bit bigger because it's easier to pipe, especially in those narrow sections. And it gives you nice big bubbly words. And so again, when I've outlined this cookie, anything that's kind of an inward dent or an inward kind of corner, inward edge, I don't know how you would call it, I kind of overpronounce those outlines just to make sure I'm keeping all that flood in. And you can see how my flood sort of melts into each other. This is real time. I didn't speed up this video. I tend to flood a little bit faster than I did when I started. So even if this is a little bit fast for you, take your time. I've been decorating for quite a while now. I would say probably 10 years. So I'm kind of used to the consistencies and everything. But this is real time for me. And so if you can see how my flood kind of melts together, I like that because I don't have to sit there and smooth out my cookies, and that saves me a lot of time. So if you find it's too loose for you and you can't control it as well, or you just like a thicker flood, that's okay too. You can add a little bit less water to your flood, and then you will have, however you want it. So again, this is what works best for me over the years. Do I make it too thin sometimes? Probably, because I'm just so used to having it thin. But again, it's like what works best for you. If you're having really trouble like with over flooding your cookies, or you're getting too much color bleed or things like that, sometimes it's because your flood is too thin. So adjust, try different methods, see what works for different people, and eventually you'll find your rhythm and you'll find your flow, and you'll have your own way of doing things. But this is kind of like my troubleshooting, everything that I've learned over the years of making cookies, selling cookies, and doing all these things, and all the things that have happened wrong. I tried to prevent them and share them with you guys, so it makes it a little bit easier. I'm just doing the outline for this cookie, and as much as I would love to freehand it, I cannot. And so I'm using my projector here. And so you see a shadow on my cookie. So I have a projector that projects the image on my phone. So I bought this cutter and it comes with the words. So I screenshot the words or the letters there, and I have it on my phone, and this will project that image. So I'm basically just tracing with my piping bag the image that I'm seeing. So I'm outlining everything. And again, I want this outline to dry for a little bit. Again, 1-2 minutes. It's thick icing, so it doesn't take too long to dry enough. And just when I say dry enough, it just means that it's not going to move anywhere when I start flooding. If the icing is still wet, I might push it with my bag if I flood too hard. So this, again, a few minutes here, will just dry it enough that it's not going to budge. If you need help with lettering, this type of lettering or any other type of lettering, I do have a how to write on cookies video, and I will link that also below. But make sure you check it out because I go over a lot of tips on how to get the right consistency and how to use your piping bag. There's a lot of kind of tricks with pushing the icing, pulling the icing in certain directions, and it helps a lot. And you can see on the Y here, I've made a mistake. My icing didn't kind of connect to the cookie, and it just went the other way when I pulled my bag away. So I'm just going to scrape it off with my scribe. Again, another good use for a scribe. And because it's not dry, I can just wipe it off really quickly. And it comes off pretty easily, and you don't really notice it. But again, these things happen. I try to show my mistakes as much as I can for you guys. And then I'm just going to go back and try this again. So again, making sure my icing is nice and secure on the cookie and staying nice and close, pushing the icing out and making sure, again, it's secure before I pull my bag away. So now we're good, round 2. And I'm just going to fix that tip with my scribe. And so now what I'm going to do, of course, is do my squiggles. So I've moved my projector out. We don't need it anymore because I've got my outline. And I'm doing my squiggles basically. So squiggles / lines in all the thick parts. My base icing is crusted over, not fully dry, so this helps prevent craters. And then this is my extra step to help prevent, because I want nice, real bubbly letters on this cookie. So it looks kind of crazy right now, but it'll all come together, I promise. So I'm going to take my flood right now and go ahead with my flood. Again, those corners, I'm barely putting pressure on in those corners. They're so small, those sections, that if I can't get right in there, I will use my scribe to smooth it out. What I do sometimes is almost let go of the pressure of my bag and then kind of pull my bag in that direction. And that sort of just pulls the icing enough to cover those areas. But you can see after each section, I'm going in after I flood with my scribe. Takes a little bit of time, but once you get the rhythm going, it's pretty quick. And sometimes you can do like a couple letters at a time if they're small sections, and then go back with your scribe on both of them. So it kind of depends, but I always have my scribe close by and just ready to kind of just fix up those edges a little bit. So pull the icing all the way down the corners, and then, if there's a square area like the top of the A or the top of the Y, let's say, then you kind of fix it with your scribe to make it nice and square. And you can just see it coming together as I fill in, and it just looks so much better. And I just love these cookies. I don't know what it is about the word cookies, but I have a few of them, and this is one of my favorites to pipe. And it's actually really fun. Once you break it down into like kind of shapes and outlines and filling in, it's actually not as hard as it looks. And that is our baby set. And I hope you'd enjoyed it as much as my coworkers did. And I hope you get to try some of these designs. Let me know if you have them already or what your favorite design was. And we'll see you in the next video. As always, happy baking.